But it's such a fascinating idea because it makes you reassess all of your priors about what the government should be doing and how it's doing it. It lets you really think about how racial divisions are animated in our policy infrastructure. It makes you think about what kind of security people should have and why they should want it. And, I think I wrote the book in part because there were all of these policy experiments that were coming to fruition. And this was like an idea that was gaining traction. But the thing that I liked about it was that it was so expansive. It really lets you think about like, okay, how do we make whole countries richer? How do we get kids to learn? Why do we have the system that we have?
Hello, dear friends and damn givers. Welcome to the Let's Give a Damn podcast. I'm your host, Nick Lapara, and on this show, I, along with my incredible guests, explore what it looks like to live a meaningful life. Each one of my guests wants to leave the planet much better than they found it. Let's Give a Damn family, thank you for showing up. I'm so glad you're here. And welcome to the first podcast episode of 2021. This year is already off to a crazy start. You know, thousands of white supremacist domestic terrorists storming the Capitol in Washington after the president told them to. Just a few more days until this Trump nightmare is over. My goodness, y'all. Don't worry. I won't bore you with more ranting about this because I'm sure you've been neck deep in it over the past few days. My guest this week is journalist Annie Lowrey, who writes on politics and economic policy for The Atlantic, and she is the author of one of my favorite books of 2020, Give People Money. During this conversation, we talk about an idea that is gaining popularity all over the place, UBI, or a universal basic income. Now, UBI is something that I think is desperately needed and is inevitable given the evolution of technology, income inequality, and so much more. I ask you, all of my listeners, to go into this conversation with an open mind and an open heart. And I ask you to dive into this topic beyond this podcast conversation. We have so much work to do to make sure everyone is taken care of in our society. Because when everyone is cared for, we can and will accomplish so much more together. Before we begin, a quick reminder that you can, anytime and for any reason, email me at hello@letsgiveadamn.com. I'd love to hear from you. I always love hearing from you. And now, let's get right into my conversation with the incredible Annie Lowrey. Let's go. It's a pleasure to have Annie Lowrey on the Let's Give a Damn podcast today. Welcome, Annie.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is a long time coming, and I'm really thrilled because we're going to get into so much today. But your book, the topic of your book, Give People Money, was already on my radar. UBI and other conversations surrounding it. But your book was one of the best things that I've read on the topic. And, I knew pretty immediately, like, I wanted to kind of hash things out with you because I think it's a really important topic that we need to talk about in these times, especially where there is a sort of kind of a massive growing like income gap, and the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. And we're just not set up to take care of people in the ways that I think we need to, right?
Yeah.
And so before we get into all of that, though, let's get to know, I don't know much about you besides your book. Let's get to know Annie Lowrey a little bit. You guys live in California, right?
Yeah, so we live in San Francisco. I had moved to DC after college and lived there for like 12 years, 11 years. And so I'm a new Californian, which it's funny because so much of my experience here has been during COVID, which
Sure.
is unusual. But yeah, it's great to be out here and at least to be someplace where the weather is always nice if you're going to be stuck inside, I guess.
It is a lot nicer out there, that's for sure. We lived in it's a different type of weather, but we lived in Tacoma, Washington before.
Yeah.
Now we're in Nashville, and we do not like it here. That's a different story for a different day. But we lived in Tacoma, and it's not as sunny as maybe where you are in California, but it is more temperate all year round, right? Like I loved that. The lowest it ever got was, maybe 30 to 40 was like a super, super tragically cold day.
Yeah.
And then, the highest it ever got was like a couple days in the summer in the 80s. And then it was like just in that mild, like 60s, 70s all the time. It was
Oh,
so
it's
great.
super, super nice. Yeah. And it's cool for me. I'd never lived on the West Coast because I grew up in New England. So I'd always lived in Unreal America, Estella Corridor. And I'm a huge defender of DC as a city. People really like to crap on DC, but it's an amazing, amazing place to live. But it's been cool to be out here, even if so much of it has been dominated by, I feel like since we came out, it's just been fires and COVID, basically.
Yeah. So, I mean, people talk about San Francisco as kind of this like, graveyard, right? Like, nope, everybody left. They all left, because it's obviously a lot of tech people and a lot of companies there. Everybody's
Yeah.
left for Austin and otherwise. Like, how does it feel there? I mean, again, maybe you're not like going out and about all that ton, but does it feel like it's emptied out, or does it still feel like there's life and some level of vibrancy despite the craziness of the year?
Yeah, I mean, I find that discourse kind of interesting. It's funny. So we came out here in part because we had just a ton of friends who lived out here. Aside from sort of DC and New York, we had like our largest population of friends lived in the city. But they're all like doctors, nurses. We know like a lot of health professionals, weirdly. We actually didn't know that tons of writers, didn't know that many people who lived in tech, and worked in tech. The people we know who worked in tech, we knew kind of like not that well and not that personally. Maybe you
Sure.
go to dinner with them or something. And so it's interesting because, quietly the people that we know really well are like, wow, the city might get more livable. Like declining rents is a really great thing.
Yep.
Obviously, that's not to at all say that COVID is a good thing, or that even just tech leaving the Bay would be a good thing. But it is a place that feels completely out of equilibrium, like
Yep.
no place I've ever lived
Sure.
before.
Yeah.
It is actually really shocking, the just extraordinary, crazy levels of wealth, combined with the fact that San Francisco itself is struggling mightily with all of these problems. I found the politics out here to be unbelievably fascinating, right? There's this like old chestnut about San Francisco's politics being a knife fight in a phone booth. And that's true. You have all of these resources that can't solve these problems, and kind of like want to vault over them. It's been really fascinating being out here for like the Prop 22 thing.
Yeah,
It
sure.
has like a dysfunction to it that obviously other cities that I've lived in have had a lot of problems, but even DC just didn't feel like it had the like the tearing apart quality
Yep.
that you get in San Francisco. And so it seems to me that like not that many people have actually left, and
Sure.
I don't know, who knows.
Yeah,
We'll find out eventually.
yeah, I think it's I think a similar argument could be made for, what New York has gone through, right? Like
Yeah.
I have a few friends that have left, but most have stayed. And, if you look at the media and you look at a lot of conversations, it's all the city is empty and this and that. And granted, tens of thousands of apartments are empty right now. But on the positive side, if there is a positive, and I think there are lots of positives that are coming out of this pandemic, there's obviously a shit ton of like terrible things that have happened. But
Yeah, absolutely.
one of the things is, yeah, you live in a city that was very unreachable for so many people. Like they could never,
Yeah.
oh, I want to give San Francisco a try. Well, they just couldn't do it because they can't afford $3,000 for a closet, right? And so now looking at New York, so our plan is we're hopefully moving to New York in the spring, and just looking at apartment prices, right? Like, I mean, I was just looking around East Village the other day, and yeah, an apartment that listed right before the pandemic for $4,600 a month is $2,250 right now. Like it's
Wow.
gonna give a lot of people a chance to maybe move to San Francisco and give it a try, move to New York, and like maybe some of the people that were taking it for granted or have too many resources left, and people that don't have as much can come in and sort of like figure it
Yeah.
out, and bring different things to the city.
Absolutely. And I do think that there's a way in which New York still has this kind of vibrant, functional middle class who live in Brooklyn, who live in Queens, who
Yep,
live in
yep,
Staten Island, right? Who live just across in Jersey, or
yep.
like upstate just a little bit. And you have public transit that makes that all like pretty easy and accessible. The
True.
thing that I found remarkable about San Francisco is, yeah, it just has that complete missing middle, right? Like, how are you supposed to, have, two decent good salaries salaries, you couldn't possibly afford an apartment here. And that's not to say that New York isn't expensive, but New York does have just, like so much more housing stock. And it's been fascinating because like while I lived in DC, the complaint there was that there was too much building. It was gentrifying too fast. DC's like longtime vibrant Black middle class was getting displaced into Maryland. But DC built thousands of units of apartments while I was there. And a lot of the complaint was about the building and, these like ugly squat, like there's a name for them that now I can't remember, but like the condo version of McMansions, these like 4 to 8 high rises with like retail on the first floor. And people like get really mad about that. But it did mean that the city grew by like 100,000 people just during the time that I lived there. And here, like there's no cranes in San Francisco. Nothing gets built. It's like mind boggling to actually see a really vibrant place kind of strangle itself basically because it can't tackle these problems. There's no building here ever. Like it's kind of crazy.
That's wild. I mean, like we live in Nashville where I mean, I think there's 19 or 21 cranes over. I think that right now, I think Nashville has the most cranes for the size of our city, like anywhere in the U.S. Like they can't stop building here, and so it's the complete opposite here, where they're capitalizing on. I mean, a lot of people, maybe even from San Francisco, but definitely LA and New York, have moved here since the pandemic started. I mean, we are just getting flooded with like all my friends in real estate. They're doing super fucking well because they've been selling houses left and right to all these people that are coming from these other cities to, have a little bit more of a backyard, front porch, that whole thing. So that's really interesting. What are you doing to like, what has kept you sane during these 10 months of not doing many of the things that we did before? Like what is keeping you going? I mean, obviously you have a family, you have a kid and all that. So that's helpful. I've loved being home with I spent a lot of time on the road before this happened. I was gone at least 2 weeks a month. And now I've been home for 10 months. I haven't been on a plane since February. And so I love that. But like outside of family and stuff, what's sort of been keeping you going?
It was funny. My husband and I, so not this past Thanksgiving, but the Thanksgiving before, we were talking about our like 2020 resolutions. And we were driving back. We had gone to have the holiday with his family in LA. We were driving back. And because we had a kid, we were driving back like in the middle of the night so that the kid would like sleep in his car seat.
I know the drill.
And like mainlining caffeine. And our goal for the year was to not travel so much. We had like done this calculation that both of us together, whether we were traveling together or traveling individually for work, had taken a total of 24 trips in the first year of our son's life. Right. And as like having a baby is tough. And we still just like piled all of this stuff up on top of it. And and then 2020 happened and we have not gone anywhere since March. And so it's actually been nice. I've read so many more books. I've watched so many more movies. I've got to spend so much more time with my kid and my dogs than I would have. And I am filled with gratitude that we live in a place that takes COVID really seriously and where mask wearing is absolutely universal. And, the new variant of COVID is really frightening. And obviously what's happening in California right now is just unbelievably tragic. But it has been nice to take more walks and to, go hiking with the dogs or put the baby in a backpack and get out. And so it was last year, one of my reading projects was I read like 5 Graham Greene books, which I wouldn't have done.
Yeah.
Graham Greene turns out is a really, really good novelist. And I really highly recommend that people delve into his work. And so, it was personally, there were a lot of upsides. Neither me nor my husband lost our jobs and we kind of transferred into being able to do a lot of reporting from home. And so I feel really grateful for that. Is there a thing that has been keeping you going during this hell year that just ended?
Yeah. I mean, I have started another company and a nonprofit this year.
Man.
And basically coffee, cigars, and weed are keeping me going. If I'm being completely honest, like, I mean, yeah. And I've read a ton, spent a ton of time with my kids. It's been really good. Like I do long to travel again, like so badly.
Oh, I cannot wait.
I want to get on a plane so badly and just go anywhere. Like I'll just take a trip to get on a plane and then come right back, like round trip, get right back on the plane and come back. I just need to get out of, especially, so you mentioned like being in a place, grateful being in a place that takes this seriously. I live in the opposite. I mean, I live in the COVID capital of the world. I mean, we have more cases per capita than anywhere on the planet Earth, right? So I live in a place where, yes, I do live in a blue sort of like a blue little dot on the map in the midst of a sea of red. So there is more taking it seriously here. But I mean, it's still pretty tragic to see what's happening right around me with, this pandemic. So it's not been as easy to find people that take it equally as seriously. I mean, we've lost some friends, and some friendships have gone by the wayside because of this pandemic, because just so many people here are not taking it seriously. So thus we can't go out to as many places because, we have to, like when we go to the park with the kids, we bring our masks along in case just so that we have them with us. If there's anybody there, we don't stay. And so just like finding because likely the people that are there don't have masks on, and we're going to be like playing on the playground with them. And so it's just been really difficult to be in this place. But yeah, my wife read 120 books. I read half of that because I just work too damn much. And so, yeah, we're just doing a lot of like just family stuff, and it's been really, really good. My kids now, I get to see them 20 times a day instead of for a couple hours, at the beginning of the day and the end, or when I'm like gone for a week at a time. And so they get mad at me when I have to go out and work because they see me so much. And I love that. I mean, like, I still got to go work, but they love that I'm around more. It's like they've gotten used to me again, instead of like having a relationship with me through FaceTime or whatever.
Yeah, so that's so great. And I'm with you. Like my favorite, I could take or leave writing. I love reporting. Like I live to report, and I have gotten the opportunity to report from some really amazing places and to have really amazing experiences. And I was like, I want to be like having not showered in 5 days in the middle of nowhere, doing something stupid, probably. Like I cannot wait to get back to, that's just the experience that you can't like replicate if you're stuck in your house. And reporting on the phone, it works, and it's so important not to put anybody in danger, but it'll be really cool to just get out there and do weird stuff again.
There's nothing that takes the place of the human interaction, the human touch, the human like being in front of people. I mean, before the pandemic started, we're on like, I've done 180 episodes on this podcast, and before it started, maybe 5 out of the 120 at that point were all done in person. So I spent a lot of time traveling around. I spent so much money like just getting places so I could be with the people. And now I did 50 something last year, and 50, all of them were virtual. Yeah. And so I've gotten used to this, but it's not the same. I'd love to be having, coffee with you in the same room and like really like, diving in. But so I too can't wait to get back to normal. Here's a quirky question.
Yeah.
So you're married to Ezra Klein.
Yep.
I'm a huge fan of Ezra's work and his podcast, and I'm a faithful listener. But I was sitting here as I was thinking about, this conversation we're about to have. I'm like, shit, like the conversations. So there's 2 scenarios in my mind. You and Ezra are super smart, both of you, like really, really smart. And I'm like, I've said often before, thinking about Ezra, because I think he's younger than me. And I'm like, how does someone like much younger than me have, 3 of my lifetimes of intelligence like crammed into that brain, So I was thinking like, what are the conversations like? There's 2 scenarios in my mind. Either the conversations in your house are like always, intellectual, where you're always talking about smart things, or do you talk about it so much for work, where you're always reporting and doing podcasts, that when you guys like hang out, you guys just like eat, junk food and watch junk TV just to like decompress? Like, what is sort of that dynamic in your home? Because both of you do sort of outward facing work where you have to talk on, big topics and complex topics and ideas. And so what does that look like in the home?
It's an interesting question. Yeah, I would say that probably like any couple, a lot of our conversation is just about like what one of our dogs is doing, or who is taking care of the kid, or like who's making lunch and who's responsible for laundry. There's a
normal
tremendous amount of that. It is really nice that we do work that's sort of adjacent to each other, but we work in really different ways. And it's really nice to like, I edit him and he edits me sometimes. Sure. Occasionally we do read the same books. I feel comfortable saying that he has just terrible taste in like movies and music. Sure. And so we don't share so much of that. He's also quite extroverted and I'm quite introverted. And so very often we'll decompress in opposite fashions. Yep. And so it's funny, in COVID, I feel like he's just like dying to go out, to like go party, go dancing, go like, I don't know, just like see people, have dinner parties, whatever. And I'm like, I've not been alone in like a year. Like I've not been alone in a year. I want to go someplace which is perfectly silent for a long time. And so, yeah, but it's really nice. Like he it's nice having access to somebody else's brain like that. And I hope that I would play the same role for him. You do. Yeah. Yeah. But it's funny because our work is often touching on the same topics, but like the way that we write is really, really different. Like I do a lot more in-person reporting than he does and do much less opinionated work. But yeah, it's in it because so he's in a job transition right now. So he had been managing people for like 7 years and he's now just going to be writing, which I think will feel really good for him.
He was at Vox and he's going, is it New York Times? Is that where he's moving?
Yeah, he's going to the New York Times op-ed page. So it's going to be a really, really different thing that he won't be managing anymore. And we'll just be able to talk to people and write.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one thing before we move on, you talked about how he's extroverted, you're introverted. That's the last thing I'll say on this whole pandemic thing is, my wife and I have a really good relationship. I'm super grateful for her. And also like she, I think, wants to get rid of me so badly. Not like she just go. Like I have a lot of my friends who would love to travel more for work and for pleasure, for whatever.
Yeah.
And in a lot of times just because of the dynamics of family and kids and all that, like they don't get to leave as much because, their partner needs help in the home and you can't leave for a week at a time. And my situation has always been, hey babe, I've got to go to New York to do these podcasts or whatever. And she's like, cool, we'll just compare calendars. Like she's never ever once told me you can't go on a trip because I think partially she's a badass, and she can take care of everything. But also I think she's like, get out for a few days so that I like you a lot more when you get back. And it's been none of that for 10 months. I think she too is looking forward to some normalcy so that Nick can, say, hey babe, I need to go to LA. I need to go to New York. Let me get out of here. And she's like, please go, like book the fucking ticket and leave. I think
it's going to be so fascinating to watch people once everybody is vaccinated and we have herd immunity, or once you're personally vaccinated and can travel again and feel a little bit more confident with that, like what it is that people do. Yeah. And so it sounds like she'll be like, see you later. And you'll be like, yeah, I'm going.
she will 100% say see you later. And I will be clicking on the book it ticket while she's saying that for that first plane ticket. How are you feeling today with again, we're going to get into UBI in just a couple minutes, but I just wanted to kind of open up with some of this stuff. How are you feeling today? So we've got a couple dynamics going on. One is, I think we have some really good news coming out of Georgia. With the runoff race. Looks like we've got both of those seats. And I think I can say based on what I know about you and your politics and stuff, we've got those two seats. But then also you've got this different scene in, Washington, your old home today, where, tens of thousands, the president said 250,000. I don't know how much legitimacy there is to that number because he doesn't know numbers very well. But there's a lot of people in our capital right now supporting the false claims from our president and from other Republican leaders. So there's this weird dynamic where last night I went to bed feeling pretty strongly and pretty okay about, I think we've got this now. It's amazing that Georgia's flipped blue and hopefully we'll see some, great things come out in the next few years. But then at the same time, we've got, this weird dynamic in Washington right now. Now I'm confident that nothing's going to come of it. I mean, there's no way Trump is president in 14 days, but just the process of getting there, where he said simultaneously while Pence was getting ready for the joint session, an hour and a half ago, Trump was saying outside the Capitol, I will never concede. It's this weird dynamic. Yeah. So kind of politically in society, how are you doing and what are you hopeful for right now?
Yeah. So white nationalism and the terrorist violence that comes with it is absolutely petrifying to me. And it is something that I really hope the Biden administration uses the power of the state to tamp down on. I think that we've seen this like winking, nodding, and sometimes straight bullhorning sense from the president, who is, a white nationalist himself, that, well, this is all okay. We're taking our country back, right? It's this absolutely revolting ideology that has had this terrifying prominence. And I feel like for me, right, like DC, yes, it's the seat of our government. It's where people come from around the country to make our laws and to make policy, but it's also a city itself
Sure.
with 800,000 people who live there, many of whom work for the government but are not policy making exactly, right? Like these aren't politicians. These are the people who are making sure that the mail system runs, or working in HHS to make sure that there are appropriate regulations, or they work at FDA. And, until really recently, DC was a majority Black city. It's now, still a very multiracial city. And so it's heartbreaking and so upsetting to see that happen. And I follow it so closely because so many of our friends live there, and it's been really hard not going back to DC this past year for me. And so, to have people come and basically proclaim that they're going to be violent, not just in the place of government, but in this place that hundreds of thousands of people call home, is really upsetting. And again, I just hope that, we've seen some really amazing reporting. I know there's a great Washington Post story about this, about how the Department of Justice has not taken white nationalist threats seriously enough, has not treated them as terrorism. So really, upsetting to see that 5G tower got taken out with the exploding RV, and I felt like that wasn't treated as exactly the
That's 3 miles. That was 3 miles from my house. Like it's right in my backyard.
It's so unbelievably upsetting. Yep. And so I feel like, there's my colleague Ibram Kendi and a lot of my other colleagues have, I think, been really at the vanguard of advancing this notion of, right, like how do we move towards a more anti-racist, less racist society? And I do feel like part of this is, seeing this threat for what it is, and how upsetting that has been. Yeah. So that's that. On Georgia, I had not expected both of those seats to flip. And I feel like it hasn't exactly sunk in for me yet how different the world is. So, it doesn't look like they're going to get rid of the filibuster. Joe Manchin is not in support of that. And Joe Manchin is now, for better or worse, one of the most powerful people in our government.
Yes.
But this is such a sea change, right? Budget Chairman Bernie Sanders, Budget Chairman
Wild.
Bernie Sanders. The fact that the Biden team will be able to get most of their nominees through pretty quickly is really, really different. Yep. The amount of stuff that they can do, even though, they won't get rid of the filibuster, it looks like, but the amount of policy that you can do through, it's this kind of arcana, but it's called budget reconciliation, which these are the bills that cannot be filibustered, it's pretty sizable, right? Like $1,400 additionally is going to go out to people. We should get some really good expansion of Medicaid, which is a really successful program, really important part of the ACA. And there's a lot that the Biden administration can do unilaterally, policy-wise. I would really hope that we could see climate legislation. There's a new provision that just came through that says that, climate-related bills are not subject to PAYGO, which is really, really important. So it is just, it's an amazing thing to see, and just watch the political transformation of the state of Georgia, right? Like a former state of the Confederacy. It's like, has now a Black senator. Like that's really great and really awesome. And so I feel like, it hasn't exactly, I think because people didn't exactly expect for this to go to this way. And it just shows that it's a pretty politically confusing time. Like I think Trump probably did a little bit better, and Democrats didn't do great on the down ballot in the election, but then to pick these two seats up. And I would also say, not to be political about it, but Loeffler and Perdue were not exactly like great candidates or great like policy lights in the Republican establishment.
It wasn't. It shouldn't have been hard to beat them any way you slice it. They're not wonderful. Right.
They were really uniquely weak candidates, both of them. The stuff with Loeffler and her money and the stock trades and Purdue. I mean, it's just, that is one thing that I really do hope that they do, is just bar members of Congress from trading individual stocks. It's absolutely,
It's bonkers.
unconscionable that that isn't just law. So yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Anyway,
Yeah.
that was like a long disquisition about all of that.
That's what I was looking for. I mean, it is a
Yeah.
very, you hit the nail on the head. It's a very confusing time politically. Like, although I am excited about some of these things that are happening, it's not exciting how divided we are. It's not exciting how close these races are. It's not exciting to me that 74 million people voted for Donald Trump on his second term. Like, after all the shit that he pulled for 4 years. Like, that's not exciting to me. That is discouraging in every single way, that 74 million people, including people that are near and dear to my heart and my family, cast that vote. Some of them not even the first time, but they chose to do it the second time because they saw this boogeyman, that was going to change everything, named Joe Biden. And so they thought that this was still the right choice. Like, it's wild to me, and it's very confusing. And I'm hoping for, there's a lot of healing rhetoric right now from people that I love and respect on the left. And I just hope we can accomplish some of that, because this isn't going away. The 4 million people that voted for Trump, those are still our neighbors and our friends and people that are in close proximity to us. So like, what do we do now? Like, sure, we can be idiots and we can shit all over them for losing, the House or the Senate and the presidency after a first term. But what is that going to get us? Like, I don't want to live in a place where every race is like the Georgia runoff, where it's like 49.8% to 50.2%. That's 0.4%. Like, that is not, it shouldn't be that close. And we are so deeply divided. So we'll see. I'm excited that we can get back to some normalcy. I don't have to check Twitter every 10 and a half seconds, but it's still not good. Like, we're not in a great place right now. So
Yeah.
You wrote a book, as I mentioned at the beginning, called Give People Money. And, you're known in your career as, a journalist writing on politics and economy and stuff like that. What was going on in your life and career at the time that pushed you to want to write a book on giving people money, literally, on, just sort of describing your views on a universal basic income, why it's important, what works, what doesn't work, all of that stuff. What was going on that made you want to do that at this, because it's a year and a half old. So at this point in time in our history and, in the middle of a Trump presidency, like, what made you want to write this book?
So UBI, for people who haven't, the vast majority of people who have not read the book, UBI is a really old idea.
Sure.
And like 500 years old. But it has never been tried anywhere. We have some things that sort of approximate it, but it's not in existence in any country or any place. Certainly not at any scale. And the whole idea of UBI is that, a government would give people cash unconditionally and to everybody in perpetuity. And it sounds outrageous on its face, but the more you think about it, you can look around and you can see that we have all sorts of things that are sort of like that. And we know a lot about what would happen if you did something like that. And the reason that I wanted to write the book was that it's just I'm not even still sure that UBI is necessarily like the number one policy idea that I would implement if all of a sudden I was queen or, could magic wand things into existence. Sure. But it's such a fascinating idea because it makes you reassess all of your priors about what the government should be doing and how it's doing it. It lets you really think about how racial divisions are animated in our policy infrastructure. It makes you think about what kind of security people should have and why they should want it. And, I think I wrote the book in part because there were all of these policy experiments that were coming to fruition. And this was like an idea that was gaining traction. But the thing that I liked about it was that it was so expansive. It really lets you think about like, okay, how do we make whole countries richer? How do we get kids to learn? Why do we have the system that we have? And it had that sort of like depth of intellectual interest for me. And so that was why I wrote the book. And I've known Andrew Yang for a long time. And he hadn't, when I was writing the book, he hadn't started campaigning for president yet. It was actually quite a while before that.
Sure.
But I do think that he really pushed that idea to the forefront in a great way. And I'll be interested to see how his mayoral campaign might lead to even more interest in it. Or, if he ends up going into the Biden administration or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, there were two people that came to mind, as I've explored this idea of the UBI over the last couple of years. There's two people besides yourself that I've sort of, interacted with, on, books and videos and all that. One is Andrew Yang. And, two is Rutger Bregman, the Dutch historian who, he kind of went viral and got famous after that, calling out billionaires for tax evasion at Davos, a couple of years ago, right? So it sounds like, have you interacted with one or both of those individuals on this topic or not? Because I eventually want to get to, there's different versions of, what a UBI looks like, right? That's the big idea, but there's different versions of how it plays out or why it's beneficial and all that stuff. So have you interacted with them at all on this?
Yeah, both of them. I've never met Rutger, but I read and I loved his book, and Andrew and I have known each other, not super well, but we've known each other for quite some time now. Yeah.
Yeah. Rutger's books, both of them, Utopia for Realists and his new one, Humankind.
Yeah.
He's another one, I mentioned Ezra earlier, where I'm like, fuck, these guys are so friggin' smart. Rutger's another one where I'm like, this guy's brain, I think he's like 32 or 33, and his brain is just like, it works a million miles a minute, and he's so smart, and I love it. I love listening to Rutger. Both Andrew and Rutger are both, we've been in touch on being on the podcast with both of them, but it's, their schedules are so crazy. And so it's like, we'll get to it when we can, because I would love to, talk with them. So, you mentioned earlier, this is it's really been a bipartisan idea, right? You wouldn't think that, like on the face of it, you wouldn't think that any conservatives or any libertarians for that matter would get on board with this, because it's going to involve, a UBI involves sort of a central structure, AKA the government, building policies and everything around this idea so they could disperse these funds, right? But it is, so again, you wouldn't think that would be the case, but there's kind of bipartisan support for this.
Absolutely.
Why is that though? Because it makes sense that it's a left-leaning idea. Because of how part of the foundation and the platform is to take care of people and take care of them well, even if it means that we don't get as much in the end. But that's not, a conservative and a libertarian idea. So how is it a bipartisan idea?
Yeah. So I think that where it cuts against what the left has been doing in interesting ways, because I think that you could almost like make a matrix of like why is it supported and why is it detracted, not supported among conservatives and libertarians especially, and then why would it be supported and not supported among liberals? And this actually gets to the $2,000 checks question. So liberals, I think completely correctly believe that we need a more progressive infrastructure in the United States because we have so much inequality. We're not remedying it. And we have deep poverty and child poverty levels that our peer countries in the OECD don't have. So it's something like 4 times as many children proportionately live in poverty in the US here than in some of our peer countries, so like France or Denmark, right? And
Crazy.
we have absolutely the resources to solve that. That is not like a resource issue. We just choose not to. And complicated reasons why we do that. And so progressives say, well, if we have all of this inequality, why are we wasting money by giving it to rich people? And so this is a lot of the objection to the $2,000 checks is they're going to families up to, I think, $75,000 in income currently. But there's all these people who are like, hey, I haven't lost my job. I live in a household that has more than $75,000 in income. You don't have to worry about me. Don't send me money. And economists are saying like, this is not properly, right? The term is always targeted. This isn't targeted. Why do we give money to people who there's a really good reason for that. And so then conservatives, and why would liberals like this, right? Because it's using the lever of government to provide a universal safety net. It's a pretty powerful thing. And then conservatives, why would they detract from it, right? Like, this is socialism. This is too much. It's not targeted. Like, why should, people need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. We don't want to remove the incentive for people to work and work hard. And we don't want to overtax people such that it's unfair and it reduces business generation and all of this stuff. So obvious conservative arguments against it. And then the conservative argument for it, though, is that it's just simple. It doesn't require much administratively. It's not you don't need, you can look at the Social Security Agency, which is what sends out Social Security, is like tiny. It's really simple. It's really effective. It's really small. Versus take HHS and all the state health agencies, which administer public health benefit. I mean, it's huge. It's complicated. Tens of thousands of bureaucrats are required. And I think that libertarians, so Charles Murray of the bell curve fame, have a lot of issues with a lot of Charles Murray's arguments. Basically says, like, you don't need to like means test and tell whether people like need things or not. Just give it to them, right? Like, the government doesn't need to be nannying people about, can you spend things on this or that? And doesn't even need to be concerning itself with figuring out what people need, right? Like, just give them money. So I think that, all of these, that's where the bipartisanship kind of comes in, is conservatives sort of say, oh, this is like a way of doing small government. The administration is really tiny and the government is not getting involved in the details of people's lives. Whereas I think progressives conversely see it as a way to really provide a floor under people that we don't have.
What is your, like, if you could implement this, if you were, the president and you could, sort of pass this legislation and get it, to be more widely accepted, like what, because again, there's multiple different ways of doing this. There's different ways that it would be implemented. Like, what would your ideal, because you've studied it way more than I have and you wrote a book on it. Like, what is your ideal version of the UBI? Even like down to, like, what amount, as you've looked at different places, you've truthfully said that no country or place has instituted this, but small like towns in different places have tried this out. And we've got Alaska that has a version of the UBI, right? Where they get money every year. It's a lot smaller than $1,000 a month, but they get money every year. And so there's different places that have implemented it, and there's enough data at this point to see that it works and it's helpful. So like, what would you institute? What would that look like?
So I feel like if I were choosing policy, first of all, I think that you want to do UBI for kids, like, first and foremost. There's actually a proposal in the Senate, and Joe Biden has signed on to this, that would, just give cash to parents. We do not spend enough on children in this country. We spend a very small fraction of what, again, our peers in the OECD spend. The fact that we have children who grow up in poverty is a policy catastrophe and a moral blight, right? We do not take care of our own kids. And so if I were thinking about, what do you want to implement first? Child allowance, which again is basically UBI for children, would probably be the first thing. Then I like the idea of UBIing a lot of the programs that we have. So for instance, food stamps work pretty well. They're a really great anti-poverty policy tool. There's all sorts of things that you cannot buy with food stamps, and they're really kludgy. So it's like, just give people the cash. And that way, if they need to use it, like to keep their lights on or to put gas in the car so that they can get their kids to school or to work, right? Why are we stepping in and judging? And so you say, oh, but then it's like a less effective anti-hunger program. And that's probably true. But it also means that you're entrusting people with the capacity to make that decision themselves. As for like the big full fat $1,000 a month to everybody UBI, it's not such a terrible idea when you remember, and it's not like such a crazy idea when you remember that for people over a certain income level, you would just tax it back, right? So if you're making like $400,000 a year, all of a sudden you're getting this $12,000 tax benefit, but then we just increase your taxes by $12,000 net, you get nothing, right? And so you need to figure out how to make the system progressive, because we don't want to be giving just $1,000 a month to families that are poor. But like what I like about this is that it is an actual safety net that is immediate and responsive. And so you don't have to have all of this policy architecture to determine who needs what and how to get it. Like in terms of other policies that I really like, I would just eliminate TANF, which is our cash welfare program. It is racist. It is a bureaucratic nightmare. It is deeply, deeply unfair. There's all of these work requirements. And you talk to anybody who's applied for welfare and they will just tell you how awful it is. So I just get rid of it. And again, just do a child allowance. And TANF is about the parent, right? It attaches to the parent. And the nice thing about child allowances is that they attach to the kid. All it needs to happen is that you're a kid. And just generally, I would get rid of a lot of policy complexity and means testing across the government. Work requirements for things like food stamps, Medicaid, I would get rid of those. They're terrible. They're racist. They're very bureaucratically clunky. And so I feel like you can use, and this is, a point made often in the book, is you can use UBI as kind of like a North Star to tell you how to make other programs better. And it's like, make them simpler, make them easier to get, get rid of the bureaucratic kludge, stop judging people so much, just let people live their lives. But yeah, so those are some of the animating ideas.
So you touched on it a couple times in this last couple minutes, how complicated everything is, how complicated things are here. Everything from, food stamps and different welfare programs and also like our taxes. So this might be a very unfair question, but you do write on, the economy and money and otherwise. So why, I'm thinking about taxes, right? I've been self-employed for 5 years now. Yeah. And even before we were self-employed, we, 10 years ago, before we had our first child, we were adopting a child as a first child. We had a very complicated first pregnancy, and so we couldn't get pregnant for a year. So we decided to adopt our first instead of our second. Anyway, we had spent $15,000 in the adoption. The birth mother backed out. It was kind of a weird, crazy, couple of months. But there's a tax credit that you can, apply for. Yeah. And we did at that point. Now I have a CPA that does everything. I don't touch any of it. But back then I was still trying to do it myself, right? Trying to figure all this out. And we ended up calculating poorly. And, because of the adoption credit, we got a bunch of money back that year. And then 9 months, no, more than that. It was the next year. It was after the next tax year. I got a bill for, I think it was $13,000 from the IRS that I owed them $13,000. And this was 10 years ago. Recently married, first kid, was not making nearly what I'm making now. Sure. 13,000 felt like, you might as well just punch me in the face 100 times. That was a blow. Hours of negotiation on the phone with IRS got it down to 7,000, still 7,000, right? And it's that changed my perspective. That was recently married. Things were getting more complicated financially in terms of where things were coming from and all that stuff. And now we have a kid, blah, blah, blah. It's why do we make things so fucking complicated in this country? It's not that hard. There are other countries where, the taxes are even higher than they are here, but you just get a bill. They tell you how much you owe and you pay it. Here, now my problem with being self-employed is just, having to set aside all the, the 30 something percent that I make from everything and, getting it to the right place and still not knowing if that's the right amount and still working through things with my accountant, every February and whatnot. It's such a cluster with these programs and with taxes. Why do we do that? And do you have hope that could ever change? I love that you're talking about UBI is no, guys, this is simple. This is simple. This is something that we could use as a North Star, as sort of a pilot program for how simplified things could actually get. We're making it harder on ourselves. Yeah. So what do you have any thoughts on that? Why do we do this?
Yes.
Has it always been that way here in the US, or is it because we've gotten so freaking big and things have just gotten so messy?
Yeah. You are absolutely correct that the United States is a bureaucratic nightmare when it comes to individual interaction with government, right? So as you point out, in many European countries, tax authority just tells you what you owe. You can contest it if you want, or you think that there's something, but like it's literally in some cases done by cell phone. Like you can just text, right?
It's wild.
Yeah, it's whereas here, that's not true. And in fact, we have this entire architecture of these businesses that manage all of the taxes, right? Like it's a tax on everybody's time because the government doesn't do that bureaucratic management. I think this is a bipartisan thing, though I do think that Republican refusal to invest in the actual functioning of government is at stake here. But like every agency of the government is like, it's like the DMV everywhere, right? The fact that we don't have a universal health system, so we have this hugely balkanized process where people spend hours on the phone negotiating with hospitals and insurers, and you get billed. It's absolutely, oh gosh, it makes me sick to my stomach. It is an actual nightmare. And that's not to say other countries don't have socialized medicine like the NHS, but they do have fully functioning universal health systems, even if the individual components, the insurers and the hospitals are private. So there's that. I think about you look everywhere and you see kludge, right? What we put people through who are formerly incarcerated. It's like a paperwork nightmare to have gone to jail or to prison. Childcare, you're just on your own from 0 to 5. There's just nothing, right? Unless you happen to live in one of the very few places that has pre-K 3 and 4. Figure it out, parents. You just do it. So we have fewer public goods. We have much more complicated bureaucratic systems. My favorite example of this, and again, I think that this is bipartisan because I think that Democrats are about like creating perfect, intricate policies to help individual people and forgetting that nobody wants the perfect, intricate policy anyway. Right. Here in California, there is a provision that lets people with low incomes get a free or reduced price driver's license. And so you think, okay, that's like a nice and a good thing. What do you have to do to get the free or reduced price driver's license? You can think that like maybe you take a tax form and you just show it at the DMV, maybe even like self-certify and just say that you're below an income limit and, whatever. Maybe there's a form that you have to fill out. There is a form that you have to fill out, but you cannot access it as an individual Californian. You have to fill the form out. It has to be filled out by a certified person, most of whom work in homeless shelters. So if you're not homeless, why on earth would you go to a shelter to like get this benefit that's like 40 or 50 bucks? And you see this just replicated everywhere. And I think that the beating heart of this is racism, right? We wanted to make it hard for people of color and especially Black Americans to access these programs. We want these programs to be paternalistic, to change the behavior of Black families because we want them to believe that their poverty is their own fault. And that's why we have this. And I would note that, racism and the historical legacy of slavery, and I know that this probably sounds like a little bit ridiculous, but I do think it's true, is why we have the federalized system that we do, which means that the federal government doesn't actually manage that much. All of the management falls to the states, who then get to set their own rules. And so you have this really bureaucratically inefficient system set up throughout the entire country. And so, I think that's fundamentally the reason. And so these small, often European, but not exclusively European countries that are more homogenous, where there's this feeling that everybody is like literally related to one another, have ended up having much more bureaucratically advanced systems than the US has. I think because we're so big, so fractious, not homogenous at all. And I think that race is a big part of that.
Race is a huge part of it. And I think we've seen that more than ever, at least in my lifetime, during this pandemic, right? I mean, 11% of white-owned businesses will close their doors as a result of the pandemic, 50% of Black-owned businesses. I mean, people of color are being disproportionately hurt and stomped on. And we're seeing that again. We could ignore it before or not. If you give a damn, like you already knew that it was happening before, but a lot of people just ignored it. Like, oh, I don't have to pay attention to that. But now we're seeing it, right in front of us. And you brought up something that I think is interesting. It's one of the questions that, it's one of the things that always comes up is poor people are poor because they want to be that way. They can get out. You can stop being poor. And the reality is that, but unless like, yes, you could be the lucky one. You could be the lucky one to, whatever, just some random stupid, you could be the lucky one to get your audition on American Idol and boom, you're now this like well-known singer, or you're like, you happened upon a competition to build this and they loved your stuff and you were poor and then you got well-known, whatever. But like most people can't get out of it. Like you can't get out of it. The system is built so that you stay in it forever. And as we get bigger and as we get wealthier as a country, the richer keep getting richer and the poorer keep getting poorer. And one of the questions that always comes up with UBI and really any liberal leftist, policy that's going to require a lot of money is people are always saying, how are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? Right. And that to me has been one of the easiest, you addressed it a few minutes ago, a little bit when you were talking about how there's all these programs that we could stop doing it in this very bureaucratic, complicated way, micromanaging everybody, judging everybody, telling them what they can and cannot buy, and put that money toward this. But also, we have plenty of fucking money. Like, we have so much money. Like, billionaires are getting off scot-free. I did a little, like, TikTok. I don't dance on TikTok, but I just rant on TikTok. And, for the most part, most of my stuff goes unnoticed. I'm not, like, big on there. But one really resonated. It's got, like, 200,000 views. And it was about billionaires. It was about the fact, I just did some simple math. If you make $11,200 a day, since the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776, you'd still not have $1 billion today. For a person making minimum wage, $7.25 an hour, 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year, and that's no vacation. That's somebody working every single day, that they possibly could work in a year. It would take them 65,000 years to become a billionaire. Like $1 billion is like $1 billion it's immoral to me. I'm all for people making as much money as they can. But you don't make, as our beloved AOC said, you don't make $1 billion, you take $1 billion. Like making $1 billion is an unthinkable amount of money. Like you cannot, I hope people hear what I just said. If you make minimum wage, it would take you 65,000 years to make $1 billion. So I think we have enough money. We spend $780 billion a year on our military, right? A military that we have no enemies right now. We have no real threats. And we have some people that we don't get along with. So, maybe a $50 billion military, whatever. But like we are spending so much money maintaining hundreds of military bases all over the world full time. We have billionaires that are not getting taxed. I just read a book by Charles Koch, really, really, really wealthy, Koch brother.
Yeah.
And, I gave it a shot because it's called Good Profit. And I appreciate some of the sentiments of it. I appreciate that he and Koch Industries, by and large, it seems like they've tried to do things ethically and they haven't, when they did something wrong, they would fess up to it. Like they've done a lot of things that a lot of companies and billionaires or just really wealthy business owners wouldn't do. So that's all fine and well. But at the end of the day, there's still the argument that like, it's still fine that I'm worth $60 billion. And together with my brother, we're worth $120 billion. Like, why we need that much money? Why someone thinks that they need that much money to exist? Because you could never spend it. You could never spend that money in multiple lifetimes if you're living a normal life. Now, if you're buying all the shit in the world, like if you're Jeff Bezos who buys $160 million home for his girlfriend, well, then you see where a lot of that money goes, but nobody needs that, right? So talk for a second about, that was my weird way of getting to this question, which is we can pay for it, I believe. I'm not an economist and I'm not a politician, so I don't know exactly how we pay for it, but I just mentioned a couple things. Like, how do we pay for this? How can people listening begin to communicate if they believe in this idea of UBI, if they believe in this idea of give people money so that they're not struggling with very basic needs in the richest, wealthiest country that's ever existed. Like, it shouldn't happen, as you pointed out. Like, there should at least be a UBI for kids. Like, we have more kids in poverty here than any other nation that's even close to where we are,
Yeah.
economically or in terms of development.
Yeah.
So how do we pay for this, Annie?
Yeah, it's expensive that we don't pay for it. This is a point that
Yes.
I like to make, right? Yep. There's plenty. We are not resource constrained, right? No. Like we aren't. The United States is not resource constrained in the sense that there isn't money to tax. So you can make an argument about fairness, right? Mm-hmm. Is it fair? Are taxes confiscatory at some point? Is taxation theft? Like, I think that this is all like very dorm room and ridiculous, but sure. Fine. But just in terms of, there's a paper that I really like by this economist, Harry Holzer at Georgetown, that points out that our disinvestment in children and our rates of child poverty cost us something like $500 billion a year in lost output because people don't end up getting the degrees that they might have. People with brilliant ideas never make it to the field where they could perform that brilliance, and that would be a social good. We end up with more healthcare spending. We end up with more spending on incarceration. People are not as productive because they grew up poor, right? And that's the thing that drives me a little bit crazy is the country is going to be wealthy if all of us get to flourish. And right now, only some of us get to flourish. And it depends a lot on yes. who you were born to and where you were born. And so poverty is a policy choice, and it's a really expensive one. And that's the thing that I think about it is the country would be so much better off if all kids grew up in a home where they were not food insecure, where they had a high quality public education, where they had access to healthcare. So then there's this question of like, okay, well, how do you actually do it? So the United States taxes about 25% of its GDP. And most other OECD countries tax about 40%, in some case more, right? And so, do you have somewhat slower growth, a little bit less business formation? Like maybe on the margin, but you get the advantage of having people who don't grow up and can't achieve their potential and are less healthy. There's tons of, yes, as you point out, we spend a huge amount on our military. More than our peer countries do. And we actually provide a lot of military coverage for some of our NATO friends, right? Like other people spend less because we spend so much.
Yep.
We spend a ton on healthcare without covering people. And this is like an actually legitimately really thorny problem to solve. But if we had universal benefits and lower healthcare prices, you could rationalize the whole system such that you could cover everybody at a much lower cost. So right now, health spending is about 15% of GDP in the United States. In other countries, it's something like 10%. And that's just a huge amount of money, and it accumulates every year. So yeah, the money is out there. And I would note that a lot of our peer countries, before the tax and transfer system, they have similar levels of inequality to us. We just do less about it. So we create billionaires as a policy choice, and we create poor folks and poor families as a policy choice. And I think that both of those are questionable policy choices. And I would note that, yes, taxing billionaires and preventing so many from existing is probably important, but it also just, it means like taxing the 10% and probably the 50% more too. It means everybody putting a little bit more in, but hopefully getting a lot more out.
Again, I am not opposed to people making as much money as they can, right? I'm very pro, create and make stuff and build. Like, I am busier than I ever have been in my life because I'm building multiple things and I'm seeing really cool things happen as a result of it. But there's a few problems I see. So I grew up, real quick context. I'm the son of an immigrant. My dad's Guatemalan. He was born in Guatemala, came here, and then we moved back for 10 years. So I lived in Guatemala growing up. And then before coming back to live in the States, I spent 6 years traveling the world. So I got to see a lot. Incredibly poor countries and incredibly rich countries. And I lived in the bush of Zambia, Africa for 6 weeks, literally walking and biking everywhere, taking little wooden boats across crocodile infested rivers. I did that. And I've stayed in the nicest hotels in Vienna, Austria, and everything in between. So I've seen what's out there. Right. And then I came back here in my mid 20s and started living here, full time.
Mm-hmm.
And American individualism and this idea of the American exceptionalism, that we are the best nation, that we're the best nation that's ever, been on the planet, blah, 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 which I don't believe we are. And this American individualism where it's, we're already fractured, in terms of like 50 states, every state has their own government. And it's led to a lot of the problems that we're talking about, but also just everybody. And I say everybody, that's a very big blanket statement. Obviously, there's a lot of like very generous, giving people in this country. But as a whole, we care about ourselves, and we don't give a shit about other people, right? And then we think we're amazing if we do care about other people. We think it's a really good thing if we give some of what we have to someone else, versus this idea that a rising tide raises all ships. Like if we can have a country where there's nobody below the poverty line, that's good for everybody, right? And a UBI could help accomplish that. What is the poverty line? It's like $12,000 or $13,000. $1,000 a month would make sure that every family in the United States is above the poverty line. That is going to help, because what we're not realizing, that we're overworked, we're underpaid here. Obviously, we look at the minimum wage, which I addressed earlier, would take you $65,000 years to become a billionaire. It's not changed in the last like 20, 30 years. It's the same, even though inflation and everything's gotten bigger and more expensive, we're still paying people like we want them to work 3 jobs in order to have, a barely decent income. And so everybody's stressed out. We're not healthy. We're not living our best lives because money is an issue. Like money is one of the biggest things that causes people to hurt themselves. Lots of people take their lives because of things like this. Lots of families are broken apart. And as you've addressed multiple times, it seems to be something that's like part of your heart and part of who you are, is like kids. Like we're not taking care of our kids. And so I really think that there has to be a fundamental change in how we think as a country about each other. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that leads to this even political divide where, I'm vehemently anti everything that Trump is about. And I'm vehemently not anti-Republican. I just I don't line up with any of their, I shouldn't say any of their policies. I'm sure there's something that I could get along with, but you know what I'm saying? Like overall, that's not my jam, but I want to still get along with them. I want to still figure out how can we work together to make this place better? Because right now, as it currently is, I've been back for 12 or 13 years living in the US, and I've not enjoyed, I truly, and I say this truly, and it's sad, but I've not enjoyed living here one day of the last 13 years, because I've seen people that are way happier than most Americans I've met in the bush of Zambia, Africa, in, like backwoods Jamaica. They have nothing, and they're so much happier with so little, right? So I've seen that, and I come back here and people just shit on each other all the time and don't have this desire to collectively help everybody rise, How do we change that? I might be asking a question that you can't answer, because I can't answer either, but what is your opinion? How do we move forward from this? How do we get to the place where more people think, yeah, we can do this. We can implement a UBI. We can have, universal healthcare. We can have these things that other countries have done, and it's going to make us happier. If people are provided for, they're going to be happier. If 500,000 people don't have to go bankrupt in this country anymore just because of medical bills, that's just medical bills. People go bankrupt because they can't pay their doctor bill because they had a heart attack, like that's fucked up. That's like multiple levels of fucked up, that in this country, 500,000 people, 1 out of every 600 people goes bankrupt every year. 1 out of every, like that's insane.
It's so upsetting. So I think it's such a good question. Like, how do you construct social solidarity? Because I feel like historically, the way that this would happen would be through things like wars, right? Which is really awful. And I don't mean the war itself, but right, like a sense of integration, of being in it all together, of having something to fight for. And obviously, that's not something that you want for any number of reasons. But yeah, how do you foment that identity? How do you depolarize? How do you bring people together? One of the good trends that I do think has come out of the past few years is that you have seen among self-identified liberal white folks real, and like we have polling to show this, they're much more concerned about racism. They recognize it as a much bigger issue, and they think that the government can solve it. And I think that is, obviously, I think it would have been better if everybody had realized that 10 or 20 years ago.
Sure.
But I do think that this new civil rights movement has actually moved public opinion in a useful and a correct direction. That's great. Again, one of the silver linings, I suppose, of this really fractious, horrible time has been that people's views of immigration have moderated, in fact, due to the Trump administration. And that's really interesting. None of which exactly points to a way to create this multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy. But I do think that making things more democratic is a really good and a very achievable thing to have happen. Republicans are increasingly relying on anti-democratic measures to shore up their support. So voter suppression, gerrymandering, those kind of things. You can fight that, right? You can make it easier for people to vote, and therefore for people to feel like they have some true participation in democracy. And then I do think that you're right that there could be this really powerful demonstration effect of, yeah, the government can deliver stuff for you. The government can deliver $2,000 checks in a pandemic. The government can just deliver healthcare, right? Like we can keep the USPS going. We can create postal banking. And I think it's something that I hope that Democrats think about going forward is like, what are you actually just showing people that government can do? Because as you point out, like we could have tremendous state capacity and we just choose not to use it. But yeah, we can get rid of student loan debt. We can, eliminate bankruptcies due to medical bills. And I think thinking both about increasing spending, but also in just making policies that work better, making the actual literal government work better. Could that convince people that that this is, a project worth investing in? But I think that the polarization and the antipathy towards both sides it's really hard. And I don't think that there's great answers. I don't know.
Yeah, it's very difficult, very complex. I would highly recommend Ezra's book to everyone, Why We're Polarized, which also came out this past year, right? I mean, time is a blur at this point, but it's been a year.
It came out right before COVID.
Yeah, I mean, a truly fantastic book. And, I think a lot of people, because we're so individualistic in this country, we don't take these things seriously until something happens to us, right?
Right.
Just recently, I saw Meghan McCain, it was a big story a couple of days ago that she, on The View sort of proposed, we've got to take maternity leave more seriously. Yeah. Because, she was able to stay home with her kid for 3 months and, get paid to do it. And that's a great thing that, again, you would think that there are countries that give, a year of maternity leave and 6, 7, 8 months of paternity leave so that, so the partners can stay home with their wives to like help take care of things, right? They don't have to go back after 2 weeks. When we had our first kid, well, actually it's really funny thinking back when we adopted, or when we were trying to adopt, and we had to go when the baby was born in Alabama, we went down to be with the birth mother. And I was working, at a company in Minneapolis, and I had to use vacation days. I had to use all my vacation days for the year to go, and that ended up being a failed adoption. And it was just a really weird time. But, and then when we had our kids, like I couldn't, Now I can't. Now I have the freedom to do that. But back then, there was no paternity leave. Maybe a week, maybe two, but it was like, okay, now get back to work. Who gives a fuck about your kid? Like we figure it out. We need you back here, like grinding and like making stuff. And so, it's when you have people that are so out of touch, when you have Mitch McConnell opposing $2,000 checks, and he's worth some $30 million. Well, that doesn't. The reason that it's so easy for him to say we can't find this money, we can't enact this. Even the president said $2,000 checks, and his motivations are, I think, very evident as to why he was doing it at the time. But yeah, it's really hard. It's really hard being here amongst millions of people that won't get on board with something like this, or socialized healthcare, or maternity leave, or whatever, until it affects them. Megan came around and said, I now want to fight for this. We should fight for this here on The View. This should be a main subject. I'm like, well, cool. I'm glad you came around. But why did it have to take you having a baby for you to realize this is a big deal? Like, the data's been out there. The data on UBI, you said it's been around for 500 years. People have been talking about this for centuries. And no one's enacted, no one's really truly taken it on and made it a real thing. And so I'm simultaneously, I have some hope that maybe in the next 4 years, with a more unified government, that we can get more done. But I don't feel hopeful that America as a whole is going to like jump on board. I love the idea of a UBI, and I'm also like, will that ever happen here? It's a weird feeling, back and forth, like a little bit of hope. When I'm talking to you and I'm thinking about it, I'm like, man, we can do this. We can do this. Let's do this. And it doesn't seem like it would happen in the environment that we've created, the very polarized environment. I mean, while we're talking right now, Proud Boys and Trump supporters have stormed the Capitol building. And they have not, like, literally 5 minutes ago, I'm getting texts right now. It's like, it's live. They're in the building. They've stormed it by the thousands. And they're like, well, they're not getting shot with pepper bullets, and they're not being pepper sprayed because it's all white people. If you look back at the protests over the summer for Black Lives Matter, which was a mix of all kinds of people. I mean, a lot of my friends got arrested. A lot of my friends were hurt during these protests. And then right now, thousands of people are trying to delegitimize the way things work in our government, and nothing's happening to them. So it feels really weird. I don't know where I'm going with this little rant, but it just feels like I'm simultaneously hopeful, like most subjects. I'm hopeful and also like not hopeful. I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard. And I think that, it's hard to imagine something big and radical like UBI coming into place. But I do think that there's a lot that could be done to make the government work better and make people's lives better. That's smaller bore, but would be really effective. So I'm really hopeful that we might get pre-K 3 and 4, universal pre-K passed. That would be great for kids. It would also be great for parents, right? Like, what if just as soon as your kid turned 3, it's no longer your responsibility to figure out preschool and to pay for it monthly, right? Like, what if that was something that the state took care of? Similarly, I think that just making things work a little bit better. There's the unemployment insurance system really failed a lot of people in 2020. It was very hard to apply for benefits, these clunky state systems that don't really work that well. And so there's now a real push to just federalize it, right? Just like make that a function of the Department of Labor in Washington. That way the states don't even have to deal with it. And you could easily set federal policy for that. You can make a new, easier to apply for system, just make it a lot faster. And so, is that UBI? No, but that is just making government work a little bit better and making things more responsive to people's needs. It is one thing that I always remark on is that the internet has not made any of this easier, right? Like, we still spend how many hours, figuring out our own healthcare and or grappling with these state unemployment systems. Yep. And so I think that just having government work a little bit better and demonstrating to people that government can do this, it could. Maybe not the big radical thing, but I do think that there'll be this kind of slow progress towards completing the safety net and to making the system work.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that this is an elephant and how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time, you know?
Yeah.
Like I think we need to stay focused. I have these big radical ideas and big things that I'm working on, but the reality is those things may not happen in our lifetime,
Yeah.
unfortunately, but we can make these small incremental changes, right?
Yep.
And we need more young people with great ideas in office, right? We need
Yes.
more people running for office. We need more people, giving a damn in their community and starting programs. And if we want to counteract this old, billionaire kind of thinking, well, we need to create more companies that are equitable. We need to create
Yeah.
more companies that truly reward all the people that got us here
Yeah.
versus fucking them over and
Mm-hmm.
becoming billionaires while they can't afford rent, in whatever city
Mm-hmm.
they're in. You've got the people living in the Amazon employee that lives in their van. There was a big story done a couple years ago. They live in their van in the parking lot because they can't afford to live in Seattle. How is that possible that you're working at the place, a place started by the wealthiest man on planet Earth, and yet you're living in your car? Like, that's insane. And so anyway, I think that's a good attitude to keep as we look at UBI. I hope that we can accomplish it. And I hope that, one thing is we've got to have small examples of it happening, right?
Yeah.
We've got to see a lot of this. I don't think we need that example. Again, the data is clear, but people oftentimes don't listen to that data. They want to see it exemplified first. And so as we wrap up here, like, what are some of the examples? Give me a couple, if you can, examples of this working in different places. Again, not statewide or even countrywide, but things like this have happened. And
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
in my mind, when I've looked at these stories, looked at these examples, and looked at the data, it's like, well, yeah, it works. Like, look at how much happier and better off people are. So can you give people a couple examples as we begin to wrap up today?
Yeah, absolutely. So the CARES Act, this giant piece of legislation, which passed last spring, it did two big things to support families, direct support to families. So one was that and this was thanks to some Democratic senators, we added $600 a week to regular unemployment insurance payments. And we radically expanded the size of the unemployment insurance system so that if you were a gig worker, you could get those payments. And so before, you kind of had to be formally employed, but now if you were like a sole proprietor or, you were delivering for DoorDash or something, you qualified, as long as you had lost income. And it's a thing that I think people don't always remember about unemployment insurance. It's not just if you lose your job, it's also if you have lost income, it'll help with income replacement. So there's that. And then there were the checks, the $1,200 checks that went out to folks. And this was so big, so fast, and so effective that the federal government replaced all of the income that families lost in the spring and the summer until the UI money ran out.
Yep.
Not every family was made whole, but on net, this giant gaping hole created by this joblessness crisis caused by COVID, we actually patched it. It was remarkable. And we did it with cash. Yeah. and again, it wasn't perfect. In some ways it was clunky. It could have been faster. We could have reached more people. There were a ton of people who were left out. In particular, people with an undocumented immigration status and their families. So that was bad. But this was like an example that government worked. And it was so effective that we have had a better GDP result than most of our peer countries. Now, granted, those countries have kept people attached to their jobs by having the government just pay them. And so instead of losing your job, you would get these payments. Part of the reason it would have been hard to do that here is that we have much less unionization and much weaker unions. And so there, where the unions are much more involved in government, it was a little bit easier to do. They, in some cases, had these systems already set up. But nevertheless, like, it really worked. The cash really helped. So I'd point to that. The ACA was a really flawed piece of legislation. It was the only thing that could pass. It was not what Democrats wanted. But one thing that I think has worked really well is the Medicaid expansion. So in the states that have expanded, we've added millions of people to Medicaid. And I'm old enough to remember when Medicaid was described as like insurance that wasn't worth having. No, People love it. It's great. It's insurance. You can go to the doctor, you can go to the hospital on Medicaid. And we've actually had great health results because of it. It's reduced bankruptcies, as you point out. It's, and it's absolutely insurance worth having. And so I think those are two big examples where government, not bad. That was great, right? Like really, really helped people. And I hope that we learn from both of those. I really hope that the Medicaid expansion continues. The remaining states that still haven't taken that federal match, take it, because we can get more people covered. And we could expand Medicaid even more, right? Right now it covers childless adults up to 138% of the federal poverty line. That could be 200. It could be 300. And that would be really great for people. And similarly, like the UI expansion was wonderful. And those $600 top-up checks did so great. And we saw how much of a stimulative effect it had versus the sort of slower and smaller stimulus from the Great Recession. And I think that as hard as it is right now and as bad as things are, some things did go well in 2020. And so that's one of the things that I would point to.
Yeah, that's really helpful because it did. I mean, I think a lot of people aren't thinking about those things right now because we're still sort of in it.
Yes, absolutely.
But I think once we're out of this, if we ever manage to, I mean, I know we will, but it's not happening as quickly as it should be. Once we're out of this, we'll look back and have that data, have those numbers and see how effective that was. And hopefully we can use that to argue for these systems and processes that just make it easier for people to exist, to live, to buy groceries and to not be homeless, right? I mean, those programs you mentioned helped people pay their rent, pay their bills, buy groceries, stay in their homes, and they're still there today. Thank God, because of those policies. And so, that's really great. It's not called UBI, but it really helped people in the last year. And we just need to figure out how to make that more ongoing in perpetuity. How can we help people exist? Because in this last thing I'll say, one thing I love about, I don't know how this really plays out in real life, but there are a lot of people who aren't going to need, if some sort of a UBI were to ever take place, I would be one of those that wouldn't need it, thankfully, and I would be able to use that to give away to people, help the causes and charities and nonprofits that I love stay afloat. And I think there's a lot of people that it would stimulate our economy in so many ways, because there's a lot of people that it would literally save their fucking lives. And then for those of us that are doing okay, again, thank God, like we could use those resources to bless others, help others, and again, stimulate who we are and continue living, continue existing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that that's a great way of thinking about it is, if you don't need it, that's fine. You can always pass it on. But having that safety net for people and having it always there, it's an option. It's a thing that we can do.
I love it. Well, this has been a pleasure. Again, long time coming, a book that I love and want people to go get immediately. Where can people find out more about who you are, what you're doing? I don't know if you're writing any more books, or just where can they find out more about who you are and what you're doing?
Yeah. So, I'm a staff writer at The Atlantic. And so you can find me on my author page there. I have no Facebook and I don't really use Twitter anymore. But I do have a Twitter feed where I will occasionally post articles. It's actually Ezra posts that I can't even log in anymore. He posts them for me. But you can catch me in the print magazine and online. That's where all my work is.
I love it. Well, thanks for joining us today, Annie.
Thank you so much for having me.
Friends, thanks for joining Annie and me today. Visit letsgiveadamn.fm for more resources and links. And while you're there, sign up for our email list, and you can listen to all the other 175 podcast conversations we've recorded over the past couple of years. And lastly, thank you all for listening. I'm truly honored you come back week after week to listen to these conversations. 2021 is going to be an incredible year of growth for us, and I'm glad you're here for it. This show is produced by Chad and Michael Snavely and the team at Sound On Sound Off Studios. The music is by our friend Propaganda. You can reach out to me anytime and for any reason at hello@letsgiveadamn.com. I love y'all. Be safe. Keep giving a damn. Bye for now.